Hello guys, welcome back to Silas Pro Cats, and I am here to give you a review today of my first read of my TBR of August. So far, well, to say I haven't strayed from the path is actually a lie, but we're not going to count that. But I have started, well, I did start, with one of the books from my TBR, which I'm very proud of. Every single person who knows me somewhat personally knows that this is a big achievement, okay? So let's just leave it at that. I decided to start with something short, because I thought that, you know, maybe I could actually finish this in one day. I did, which is always a nice way to start the month. And the book, or rather the collection that I'm talking about, is the BBC National Short Story Award of 2022. I mentioned in my TBR video that I got this purely because there were jellyfish on it, and that is true. We have a very small English bookstore next to my university, and I saw this book there, and it did pique my interest because of the nice jellyfish on it, because I love jellyfish. In theory, not necessarily in practice, but that's a different story. I think it looks really nice, and I got interested in that because of the cover, and then I read the back of it, and it kind of like introduces 3 of the 5 short stories that are in this collection. And I thought they sounded really interesting, and so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna pick this up, you know, how bad can it be? Spoiler alert, it is absolutely not bad. It was incredible. I rated it very highly. I didn't enjoy all of the stories as much, you know, as the next one, which is entirely fair. I think this is a very common experience with short story collections. And before I get into the short stories, I actually want to talk very briefly about the fact that I think the difficulty of short fiction is underestimated, I feel like, because I used to think I don't like short stories. I used to think that I'm just really not the person for short fiction. I used to think that I need at least 400 pages to be happy, which, to be fair, since my most read genre or genres are fantasy and sci-fi, it's not necessarily 100% true, but I do believe that a lot of fantasy and science fiction definitely, if you give it time, it can work its magic, sometimes quite literally. And I think that a lot of fantasy and science fiction definitely benefits from being on the longer side. However, I believe at this point in time, it's not that I don't like short stories, it's that I'm a lot more critical when it comes to short fiction. Not necessarily just short stories, I have the same issue with novellas, for example. I think that writing short fiction is incredibly challenging because you don't necessarily have to figure out what to put into it, but you also have to figure out what not to put into it. How much do you have to put into the story for the readers to follow you, and how much can you leave out expecting the reader to fill in the blanks? I also think that for short fiction, but especially in this case short stories, form is incredibly important, because much like with poetry, short fiction, short stories, don't really give you a lot of ways to do something really fanciful with your language. Unless you're describing one singular moment and you're stretching it out into all eternity, you don't really have a lot of time with short fiction to go literally anywhere. And so if you do go somewhere, you have to figure out what to do with your form to kind of like show that to the reader, in my opinion. So yes, long story short, I am very critical of short fiction, and I'm very careful when picking it up. I have been picking it up a lot more recently than compared to years before that, and I'm happy to say that I found a lot of short stories I really enjoyed. I found a lot of short fiction that I really enjoyed, and this one is going to join the ranks. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars or something along those lines. So very briefly, the BBC National Short Story Award, from what I found out at the back of the book, or in the back of the book, like there's a small part that tells you something about the award, is that it is a UK-based National Short Story Award. Is one of the most prestigious ones that you could possibly win. I think it started in 2006? Yes. So the very first short story that is remarked as having won this prize is An Anxious Man by James Lasdon from 2006. So it's been a while since this was established as an award. And from what I can tell, there's always a group of short stories from different authors all of them UK based, that get evaluated by a set of judges and then subsequently published so people can read them. I believe the short story that won in this collection is by Saba Sams, which is Blue Forever. I think that was the one that they said had won. Something like that. So the way that this collection is made up of is we have an introduction by Elizabeth Day, who is also a UK-based author, who gives a very short introduction as to how exactly the process of, you know, finding the best short story went upon, and apparently they removed all the authors' names, which I find really nice. So as in order to not have any author kind of like benefit from their name, their prestige in a way. After that we have the 5 short stories by 5 different authors. We have one by Kerry Andrew, which is called And the Moon Descends on the Temple That Was. We have Flat 19 by Jen Ashworth. We have Long Way to Come for a Sip of Water by Anna Bailey, Green Afternoon by Vanessa Anwumesi, and Blue Forever by Saba Sams in that order. All of them are short because they're short stories. However, this book is also very small, so in comparison they seemed long. Like, for example, the first one by Kelly Andrews, which was subsequently also, or Carrie Andrew, I'm so sorry, which was my favorite of the bunch actually. That one is like 44 pages, but as you can see, the writing is fairly big, the spacing is fairly big, and the pages are tiny. This book is about as big as my hand. So they are short because they're short stories. I think I'm going to talk about the ones that I liked the most first, or maybe I'll do it in order. You know what, let's just do it in order. So the first one, as I said, is called And the Moon Descends on the Temple That Was by Kerry Andrew. I loved it. Honestly, I think every single short story collection should start with one of the best stories at the beginning to hook people to want to read more, and that's what this collection did for me. The story is incredibly sad. It is incredibly melancholic. It's basically this setting of a post-apocalyptic dystopian, not necessarily even post-apocalyptic, but just dystopian landscape. It's about a man who travels on his own. It takes approximately 10 pages or so for him to be introduced by name, which also gives you a very, very different feeling as opposed to him being introduced immediately. And he travels by himself, and then he finally meets someone else with whom to share his journey. It's incredibly melancholic. It is beautifully written. Kerry Andrew has an amazing writing style specifically for this short story. I've never read anything by that author. In fact, I've never read anything by any of these authors, which I kind of liked because I went into this basically completely oblivious to their writing style and their quirks and everything. So yeah, it's fantastic, it's incredible, it is very queer, it's very sad. Don't go into this thinking any of these are going to be particularly happy, because they're not. Elizabeth Day in the introduction said something along the lines of that a lot of the stories that they covered and a lot of the stories the judges got to read had something to do with, you know, COVID. You can see it, especially in the first story. In the first story, and in the third story as well, which also consequently was one of my favorites. Maybe I should worry about that, but you know, we'll leave that out there. So all of that goes to say, the first short story by Kerry Andrew was definitely my favorite. It was fantastic. The second one, Flat 19 by Jen Ashworth, I marked it down as 4.5 stars. I thought the idea behind it was really, really great. It's basically about this mother who is incredibly overwhelmed by all of the different roles that she has to fulfill, as in the businesswoman, the mother, the partner to her husband. I think also the daughter talking to her mother, something like that. And so she basically gets AI models made of her by an incredibly sketchy firm that basically says that they're going to keep her likelihood as well. Like, legally, they can keep her DNA and everything. It was something for sure. I found the conclusion of the story to be fascinating. Honestly, the conclusion bumped up the rating a bit more. The reason I didn't rate it as high as the first one, and the reason I wasn't as enthusiastic about it, is simply because the writing style wasn't exactly my thing. It wasn't bad, but it also wasn't exceptional. And again, short fiction makes it very easy to judge something maybe harsher than you would with long fiction, because I think the writing style was perfectly adequate in and of itself, and it was perfectly adequate and would have been perfectly adequate for something longer. Again, I haven't read anything by the author. I don't know if Jen Ashworth has written anything else. I might have to look that up. Definitely going to look up Kerry Andrew, but that's besides the point. But I think the writing style of Flat 19 was good. But because it was short fiction, and because the first one was such an incredible introduction, like honestly, maybe also a tiny bit unfair to read these like back to back, but because of that, the writing style didn't grip me as much as I would have liked it to. But I think especially the ending pulled the short story together fabulously. It's still a fantastic short story, so if you haven't read it and you would like to check it out, please do. In fact, just read all of them because they're fantastic. Right, so the third one is also one that I absolutely loved. I think it's a very, very close second to And the Moon Descends on the Temple That Was. This one is called Long Way to Come for a Sip of Water by Anna Bailey. And it's basically about this brother who travels across the country in America to get to his other brother who is dying. He has long COVID, so you know, if that is not your thing, don't check out this short story because it's very prevalent. And it talks a lot about queerness, repressed queerness, and all of the feelings, the very complicated feelings that arise from that, which fascinated me to no end. It was very harrowing. It doesn't have a clean solution. None of these stories have, which again is also a sign of short fiction doing it well, is that there's not really a solution to very complicated themes, especially not in like 30 very small and very largely printed pages. If you can't deal with topics like that, especially internalized homophobia, I recommend skipping that short story because it is the central theme of it in a certain way. I personally loved it. It almost made me cry in public. So, you know, Anna Bailey, good job. Please never do that to me again. Now, the fourth one is very fascinating to me. It's called Green Afternoon by Vanessa Nwemesi, who is also a poet. And the reason I'm saying this is because it is incredibly, incredibly obvious when you read the story. First of all, the form. As I said, if you do short fiction, I do believe that you have to do something with the form. Not simply just the narrative, but also in how you're telling the story and how you are presenting the story to your audience. And the thing that Vanessa Nwemesi did was she made the rhythm of her short story incredibly apparent to the point where I believe, or I at least perceived it as more of a long poem, long free-spoken poem than a short story, which was very fascinating. Do I have any idea what went on in that story? No. So I gave it a very tentative 4.5 stars, same as with Flat 19, but for the very different reason of I think I need to reread the story to fully appreciate it. As in, I need to reread the story without having read any of the others on a day where I have all of my brain cells available to me, which is not today, because it felt so incredibly layered, and I really want to try and figure out the form of this and why it makes me feel the things it did. Because it also almost made me cry without understanding what was going on. And I think that's honestly, you know, the highest compliment I could possibly give a writer is, you made me cry even though I had no idea what was going on. So I definitely think that Green Afternoon is the story that mostly almost requires a reread. At least from me, but I think in general it's one of those short stories that you need to stew on for a long while until you either understand what's going on or you accept that you never will and you move on with your life. It's one of the two, really. But the form itself was incredibly fascinating to me. So once more, it cannot be understated how important form is for a short story format. So, honestly, fantastic job of making me so intrigued with a short story I understood almost nothing of. Great. And last but not least, and again, a 4.5 story. We have, wait, did I give it 4? I actually only gave it 4, sorry. The one that I rated the lowest, we have Blue Forever by Saba Sams, which is a bit funny because, again, I do believe that this is the short story that won. I wouldn't have let it win. Like, for me personally, it's not the winner of this collection. First of all, I will be honest, again, Kerry Andrew took the cake for me, and so everyone coming after Kerry kind of had a bad time convincing me. I enjoyed Blue Forever. It's about this young girl, she's 12, her name is Stella, and she is on a kind of like holiday trip with her new stepfather, her new stepsister who's 18, her name is Jasmine, and Blue, who is a friend of Jasmine's, and I do believe also around Jasmine's age. And I think the themes that the story is addressing and also trying to address every once in a while are very well done. I do believe it talks a lot about over-sexualization, it talks a lot about almost creepy family members, it talks a lot about almost wanting to grow up faster than you should have. It talks about what you're willing to do in order to achieve that, even though no one really told you to do anything specific, but you're so ready to throw away all of your, well, not necessarily chances, because how many chances do you have when you're 12, but you're ready to do a lot of things for inclusivity, for being in a group together. And I do believe that the short story did a very good job of conveying that. But again, the writing style wasn't really anything special in my opinion. I will, however, say that I do believe this is partly because Stella is our POV character. She is our focalization. And so I fully understand that language is also kind of like addressing that in a way, as in making it somewhat easier to understand and easier to follow, because we are following this from a 12-year-old's perspective. But after following, first of all, this very interesting format from Vanessa Onwemesi, as well as my favorite short story, which happened to be at the beginning of the collection, Blue Forever didn't really have, like, a chance. And it's kind of sad, but here it is. It just couldn't compare to the other ones in the collection for me. But yeah, it was a fantastic experience. I really enjoyed reading this. I'm very happy I picked this up. If you are interested in any of the short stories in particular, I highly recommend you try and find them. I'm pretty sure you're either going to find them online, you can see if you can find this collection, because I think it's rather nice looking as well. If any of what I said sounded interesting to you, please check this out. If you're like me and you're very critical when it comes to short fiction, again, also do check this out, because I do believe it might raise your standards even higher, but at least it might appeal to some of them. So there is that. Again, be aware that this collection features a lot of very heavy themes, a lot of them surrounding the pandemic, a lot of them surrounding dystopian landscapes, a lot of them surrounding homophobia, or just in general queer characters not exactly having a great time, because it's not those kinds of stories. And that's entirely fair. If you don't like reading those stories, that's also entirely fair. Don't pick up the short story collection. Otherwise, if any of what I said, again, sounded interesting, and you haven't read it yet, please do so. If you have read it and you want to share thoughts with me in the comments, please do so as well. And let me know if you're now interested in picking this up, if you're absolutely not interested in picking this up, and what your stance on short fiction is in general. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you have some that you like and some that you absolutely despise? And are you willing to change your opinions on some of these, like on short fiction in general? Or are you actually quite comfortable never picking it up or only reading short fiction? As always, I hope that you have a nice reading time, and I will see you soon.